my public speaking class about white privilege and why it's a myth.
Mm-hmm.
And when I brought up this topic in class, everybody just
lost their mind.
Yeah. And they said, you can't talk about it because you're white. And it's, you know, how do you respond to that?
I mean, the first thing I would say is check your privilege. Right? I mean, why don't I get to say it because I'm white? Are you a racist? Is the argument less valid because I'm white? I argue with the argument as opposed to arguing with the color of my skin. It seems a little bit racially discriminatory that you're not allowed to speak based on the color of your skin. Either the argument is good or the argument is bad. How about this? How about if I get a black friend to come in and I hand them the text of my speech and she reads it? Then is it a better argument?
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Ben. My name's Kyle Chu. I'm at Saddleback. Thanks for coming out. And lately, in the last couple months, I've noticed the rise of populism disguising itself as conservatism. They use the name conservative while taking to personalities as opposed to principles, and they call people conservative values. I think it's spineless idiots and
Cucks,
things like that. Exactly. You probably heard them all. And I've even heard them say in the last couple days that Reagan and Buckley conservatism is dead. But
yeah,
still
I heard a member of the White House say that
conservatives.
conservatism is sclerotic
So
yesterday.
how would you address these people, and what would you do about populism disguising itself as conservatism?
Populism is not an ideology. Populism is a strategy. Okay, Bernie Sanders is a populist. Donald Trump is a populist. That's a strategy. It's not an ideology. Populism just says, quote unquote, the people should rule, and I'm going to appeal to the people directly as opposed to the elites. And anybody can do that routine. It's just a political strategy. So when people disguise a strategy as a philosophy, I think that's wrong. You have to say, okay, what do you mean by populism? And then we can boil down whether it's something that's worthwhile or not. But when people just say populism and then they say, well, it's the power back to the people, you have to ask which people, what power. Like, let's get a little bit specific here. Because if by populism you mean $1 trillion infrastructure plan, well, I remember when there was a populist leftist who was saying the same thing and we didn't like it so much. Right, but if by populism you mean that you want to cut down regulations because you think that people are being beaten down in West Virginia by energy regulations, that's a different sort of populism. So you need to tell me what policies you're espousing. Populism is not a philosophy. So when people say a nationalist populist philosophy, what they're really talking about is they're trying to put an intellectual veneer on a basket of policies that don't really have a coherent through line except for we want to build big stuff, government is good when we say it's good, it's not so good when we don't say it's good, and all the rest. That doesn't mean that everybody who calls themselves a nationalist populist isn't a conservative. It doesn't mean that people who are nationalist populist in the White House aren't going to pursue some conservative policies. There's certainly crossover with conservatism in certain areas. But the idea that nationalist populism, and the reason I say this is because I get this a lot, that it means the Constitution is defunct. Right? The constitutional conservatism is old, it's over, it's been replaced by something else. Eternal principles don't die just because somebody won. Okay, they didn't die because of Obama. They're not going to die because of Trump. And I think that, frankly, Donald Trump is being converted to some of the conservative principles by the people around him, or at least I hope he is. I think a lot of people in this room hope he is, right? And that's why a lot of people voted for him. So, again, when people say that conservatism has to be replaced, the question is with what, and the question is why. And don't let slogans and name-calling dissuade you because it's silly. There's nothing there.
Well said. Thanks.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for coming today, and everybody for being here. My question is, one thing that I find a distinguishing characteristic between the European left and the university left professors and that sort of establishment with respect to anti-Semitism is that the Democrat Party, by and large, has been supportive of Israel, and not anti-Semitic. Where I see it going now is more towards normative leftist thinking. You've got Keith Ellison, who's about to get, or very possibly the head of the DNC, supported by two Jewish people, by Bernie Sanders and by Chuck Schumer, ostensibly in deference to this wave of leftist
Bernie Sanders, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer as
Right.
well. So where do you see it going in this country realistically? I know we need to fight against it. We need to have people like you and the young
on the Israel issue. I mean,
not really Israel, but just actually real leftist anti-Semitism, like they have in the Labor Party and Corbyn and in England and in France.
I mean, leftism. The truth is that the Democratic Party, as you say, was sort of a world outlier in terms of the left. The left has not been supportive of Israel since the 1960s. When they realized that Israel was not a socialist little victim of Arab countries surrounding it, but was actually a repository of Western thought in a really backward part of the world, the left flipped, and it didn't happen to be coincidental that they flipped about the same time that the Soviet Union flipped and started supporting Israel's enemies. But as far as where that's going with the international left, yeah, the international left despises Israel. I think the Democratic Party is moving to the left extraordinarily quickly. And it's very dangerous, obviously. The old school. This is why I think that there is a realignment taking place, and I don't think that the only realignment that's taking place is on the right. I think there's some realignment taking place on the left. I think a lot of old school people on the left who were supportive of Israel are looking at the New Democratic Party and they're going, wait a second, this is not what I signed up for. And that conflict is now playing out in the open. But it's obviously a scary time if you're an advocate of if you don't like anti-Semitism, then it's a scary time, I think, on a lot of fronts, unfortunately. I wish I could say more than that, but I think that's pretty much it.
Hi, thanks for coming out. I am pretty passionately anti-abortion. I know you also are.
Yes.
And invariably, it always comes up when I have discussions with people that I'm a conservative, because if I'm pro-life, obviously I must worship Trump, which I don't worship him, but I definitely wish him well. But it comes up that I'm hypocritical because I'm conservative and therefore I don't support welfare, I don't support food stamps, I don't support these kinds of programs that have been proven, obviously, kind of to be detrimental in the long run. And my response to that is typically non-response because I just get irritated. I guess I'm looking for a Shapiro-esque response.
Okay, so this sure. So the response to the why don't you want to you care about babies before they're born but not after they're born, right? That's usually the way that this argument goes. Yeah, it's a really dumb argument. It's the same argument as basically saying to somebody, well, there's a guy walking on the street. Should he be murdered or not? And you're like, no. Like, well, you're not taking him into your house, are you? Well, I don't have to take him in my house to make me not want to see him murdered, right? They're two different issues. I don't have to adopt the guy. I just don't want to see him stabbed on the face in the middle of my sidewalk, right? I mean, like, opposing murder does not mean that it is now your job to personally support the person who is not murdered. That's a ridiculous standard. I mean, it's a ridiculous standard by any stretch. It's true for all criminal law. You should ask them, you should say this, do you oppose murder? Like an actual murder, I mean like of an adult. Do you oppose you getting stabbed today? Right, or your friend getting stabbed today? Presumably they will say yes. If not, then you should run. But it's but if you say, this person, you see this person walking by, do you think it would be good if they got stabbed, or okay, or acceptable? Would you look the other way if they got stabbed? Presumably they'd say no. You say, well, why don't you adopt? But you're not willing to adopt that person. I mean, you don't care what happens to that person as soon as they get out of your eye line, right? As soon as they're gone from your sight, you forget about them entirely. What about their problems? What about the fact that they can't afford contraception? How about that? You going to take care of their contraception now? What they do, the left likes to do this. They take two questions and they conflate them, and then they pretend that they have moral stature because of that. Right? They do this on abortion a lot. Right? They do it. Their favorite is not that one's a big favorite. The other one that's a big favorite is rape and incest. What do you do about cases of abortion and rape and incest? And as I've said before, how about this? Before we, you can answer the question. I'll give you my answer to the question. But before we do that, how about we stipulate that all of the abortions that are not done for reasons of rape and incest are bad? If you're willing to stipulate that, then I'll take on your second question. Or is it just that you want to talk about rape and incest because you want to lump that together with all the other abortions? Which is really what they want to do, right? They want to say rape and incest, we'll take the hard case and then we'll use that and pretend that that's like the normal case. Okay, 98% of all abortions are not rape and incest. So how about this? How about you assume how about this? I would even make the trade, just for the sake of saving babies. If all we could do was save 98% of the babies who are not conceived through rape and incest, I'd make a trade with you. It'd be the worst trade ever, but I'd make the trade with you that rape and incest we could still leave up for discussion, but the other 98% of babies, no. Are you okay with that? And of course they'll say no. Say right, because you don't want to have this argument. You're just trying to do a gotcha question. As far as the answer on rape and incest, by the way, the proper answer on rape and incest, if you're a pro-life person on these issues, is rape is horrible, rapists should be castrated or killed, incest is evil, that doesn't mean you get to kill babies. They're two separate issues.
YAF is doing a great job of going on the campuses and giving an alternative to the students on the campus to new ideas, differently and well presented. My question, though, is that for a long, long time, the Democrats or left-wingers, perhaps better said, have been aiming at taking over education. And they've taken over, it's not just the university campuses, it's the high school campuses, it's the grammar schools. what kind of a long-range plan would you suggest or throw out some ideas on how we could go about taking back the educational system?
So I think that obviously the first step is to maintain local control of the education system. And the biggest problem is that as you federalize it, it tends to get more lefty. The second step you could do would be to get rid of public sector teachers unions, because all of them tend to be left, and the reason they tend to be left is because then they can unionize against the government, which means against the taxpayer, so they're in favor of bigger government just so that they can get paid more. It's what the public sector unions do. So you get rid of public sector teachers unions as they did in Wisconsin. That'd be a good step. And honestly, my biggest answer is give people vouchers and make it more affordable for people to get out of the public school system entirely, because a lot of the public school system, particularly in California, sucks. I mean, I went to LAUSD. LAUSD is the worst public school district in the country. It's enormous, and it's bloated, and it should be 4 or 5 separate school districts. But because it's one city, they've made it one giant school district, and it's administered by a bunch of leftists administrators. So I think that's the easiest solution. But that requires particularly religious people to get very active and say, I'm not going to. It may be cheaper for me to send my kid to public school, but I'm not going to because of the values involved. And I think that as you do that, as you get more competition in the marketplace for lower parochial schools, then the price drops and you get more people in those schools, which would be a tremendous thing. It'd be a tremendous thing. I'm not a fan of our public education system, and I think that it's great that you have it as long as it's locally controlled and not federally controlled or even state controlled. It should be really, really locally controlled. But if you can't have that, then you should have a private school that people can go to. And I think it's a really worthwhile endeavor. If you have a lot of rich people in this room, it's a worthwhile endeavor to try and sponsor scholarships, particularly for example, inner city students to stop going to local public schools, which really are terrible and indoctrinate people in leftism, and to instead be able to go to better private schools.
Hi. Sorry. I get a little nervous, but because I'm a little nervous because you really impressed me on Tuesday. It was the first time I heard you speak, so that was a great speech.
Oh, no worries, thank you.
But I currently plan on running for the Senate of UCSB's Associate Students to Government. Mm-hmm. And one of my goals is if I'm elected to start to work on reversing the leftist trends that have been going on campus and making UCSB a more open campus where ideas can be expressed more freely, mm-hmm. and where it's not dominated by just leftist doctrine. Okay. Do you have any specific advice or strategies on how to do that without being too ideological, as in being
without being too specifically partisan? Yeah. I mean, I think that the best way to do that is to propose general rules that also happen to apply to conservatives. So there should be a general rule at all these campuses that the administration should not be able to tell police officers not to remove protesters. Like, this has been a big thing. It didn't happen at UCSB, thank God, but we've had a bunch of situations where administrators have told police officers not to remove protesters on campus, or they'll shut down the event. That actually happened at University of Wisconsin, so we had all these idiots actually line up in front of the room to protest for 15 minutes, and when we asked the cops, why don't you just take these people away to the loony bin, instead they suggested, they said if we shut them down, we have to shut down the entire event. So I think that a good measure would be to say, just as a general rule, no one shuts down events. If you try to shut down an event, you're immediately booted. When it comes to student funding, the truth is that at a state school like UCSB, it's a violation of the First Amendment for viewpoint discrimination to be the rationale for shutting down any event. And we've tried to launch lawsuits along these bases on various campuses, including CSULA. Whether or not the judge was into it is another question. But I think that that's a good place to start. As far as fighting back against some of the more leftist policies that are open, so for example, a lot of these campuses try to vote for divestment from Israel, as an example, for no reason. It's like they're a bunch of students here and they divest from Israel like anyone cares. I think the best counter to that is you should lead a divestment movement against Iran. Right, and say, why is it that you won't back a divestment movement against Iran, but you'll back a divestment movement against Israel? Oh, right, it's because you hate Jews. Which is the actual reason, right? So I think that for me to give you better advice, I'd have to have the specific stuff that you were trying to stop. And I'm happy to give you advice on that sort of stuff. You can just contact EAF and they'll give you my email address, and I'm happy to respond to that more specifically.
Hi, Mr. Shapiro. Thank you so much for speaking to us today. My name is Tiffany Haas, and I'm from the University of Southern California. As you mentioned in your speech, we've seen the rise of safe spaces on our campuses. In some cases, universities will bring in psychologists to these meetings, and they'll notate how students are feeling anxious, scared, or panicked after seeing a conservative speaker.
Mm-hmm. I specialize in that, yeah. I actually get kickbacks from the psychiatrists. It's a very lucrative business.
Considering your legal background, do you think that this so-called evidence can substantiate the silencing of conservative voice?
No, and I don't think that most of these campuses actually, the truth is that when we speak on most of these campuses, the administrators are generally pretty good about trying to facilitate. They kind of stop us in small ways, but as a general rule, it's very rare that a campus will be like DePaul and just shut it down because the kids, because the snowflakes melted. But when, as far as the idea that kids' feelings are hurt, and welcome to the real world. If you're feeling, this is my catchphrase, right? I'm like a TV character. I have my own catchphrase. My catchphrase is facts don't care about your feelings. And unlike some people who speak on campus, my goal in speaking on campus is not specifically to offend people. The easiest thing in the world is to offend easily offended people. I mean, it's very, very simple. I mean, going on campus, it's always the stuff that goes viral. It's like, ooh, snowflake triggered. Okay, honest to goodness. If you drop a pencil near these people, they flinch. It's the easiest thing in the world. So whenever you see somebody, well, wow, he's a star because he made some leftist cringe. Okay, if I say he to a man, a leftist cringes. So it's not difficult. But what is troubling is the tendency to, as you can tell from my speeches. When I go on campus, I actually reel off stats and figures. And when people ask me questions, I cite specific legal cases. And I try to be as specific as possible about the factual evidence that I provide. If they're offended by that, that's their own damn problem. And if they want to be offended, and that's their choice, because you can choose to be offended or not. If you want to be offended by what is clearly non-offensive language, then good luck to you in the real world where no one cares. I mean, try that on your employer. They come in and give you an assignment in the morning, you go, oh my God. You're going to be out on your ass the next day. And you should be. You should be fired immediately for that kind of crap. So I would hope that our schools would start, actually providing the necessities for holding a job in an actual society, as opposed to being diversity studies coordinator at USC.
Thank you.
Well, hello, Mr. Shapiro. Thank you for coming. And I really hope you come to UCSB more and Santa Barbara in general. We really appreciate you here. So I kind of have a double...
I love Santa Barbara, although I will say I was walking along the train tracks here, and there was some crazy guy talking to himself, and I thought, what is Harry Reid doing here?
Well, Joe Biden makes visits occasionally, too, so... Anyway, one question I have is something that I'd like a Shapiro-esque answer to.
I like that I'm getting a brand on this now. That's great.
You're kind of a celebrity. So if I want to start a conversation on the Affordable Health Care Act, and I start talking about why it's crippling certain people, how do I respond when the first thing they say is, well, you know what, I would be dead without Obamacare. I would be dead, my child would be dead, and if you want them to die, something along those lines.
Yeah,
the other question I have is, I think there's something like less than a third of millennials are conservative, and even less than that, millennials are evangelical. Something like 96% don't even have that claim they're evangelical don't even have a biblical worldview. So as someone that was brought up with the traditions of Israel, I'm sure you have insight as to how much stronger is the religious persecution on leftist campuses?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy to be a religious person on campus. I'll answer the second question first. It's not easy to be a religious person on campuses because you're perceived as stupid. I mean, the nice thing is if you do, once you go to Harvard Law School, they can't say that anymore. But but you get that a lot, right? It's the idea that you're a dummy for believing in religion. And the truth is, all of Western civilization is based on a Judeo-Christian value system. It hasn't sprung up anywhere else. I mean, there are tons of cultures all over the globe, and none of them have the kind of civilization America does. And America, by the way, is still significantly more religious than Europe, which is not coincidentally one of the reasons why we are significantly more powerful than Europe. So when they say that you're a fool for believing in God, the truth is that belief in God is belief. Right? You have to take a leap of faith. It can't be proved. It can't be something. It's not something that you can make a scientific hypothesis and then fulfill that hypothesis. But atheism can't be proved either. And there's no way to prove these sorts of intangibles. And what that means is that you can either choose to at least acknowledge. What I would say to people is, look, whether you believe in God personally is your own business. It is. I don't really care particularly. As a religious person, I care about your soul. But as a political person, it's your own business. I don't care. But as a society, when we fail to acknowledge the value of Judeo-Christian religion steeped in the idea that every human being has equal worth under God, you end up very quickly devolving into a socialism that ends up demeaning human beings individually. Because there's never been a place on earth that wasn't like that. The fact is that the collective takes over. People worship. People are made to worship. And we will either worship God or we'll worship the state. Or we'll worship ourselves. Right? Those tend to be the three choices. You're either a libertine, or you're a communist, or you're a conservative. Those are sort of the three choices. So, I think that when it comes to defending religion, it's easier to defend the system of religion than particular religious belief, because we all have different religions, we all have different religious beliefs. Even among Orthodox Jews, there's a lot of diversity of each individual has their own relationship with God, and you can't argue anybody else into your relationship with God. What you can say is, here is something that is unquestioned and undoubted. Judeo-Christian religion has created the foundation for the greatest civilization in the history of mankind, and ripping away the foundations of that civilization on behalf of a philosophy that really has never built anything without those roots in Judeo-Christian. Atheism, modern atheism, has its root in Judeo-Christian religion. It does. It doesn't exist in the Islamic world, right? Modern atheism, the freedom to be an atheist, only exists in the West. It only exists in the Judeo-Christian world. The freedoms that the left bases its whole worldview on are within a milieu that was created by a religion it despises. You can't just take a battering ram to the foundations of civilization and hope the superstructure stands. So that's my answer as far as God. As far as the first question about the Affordable Care Act and when people cite tragedy, I think, first of all, I think that the first answer you should give, because it takes them back, is, first of all, what's going on with you? Please tell me, please tell me, what's your health problem? And tell me the health problems that you're experiencing. And is there any way that I can personally help? Right? I mean, because here, what they're saying is you're unsympathetic. That's really, their argument is not an argument. Their argument is an emotional appeal. They're not arguing that the policy is better. They're arguing the policy is better for me. Okay, I can't argue with the policy is better for you, because it might be better for you, right? If I confiscated all wealth in the United States and gave it to that person, presumably that policy would be better for them. It wouldn't be great for everybody else. And this is why there's a book that's recently come out about empathy in politics, and says that empathy in politics is actually extraordinarily harmful, because when you put yourself in the other person's shoes, you only care about the other person. You forget about the millions of other people that it affects. And so you saw this at the town halls. I talked about this, I think, 2 days ago on my podcast. If you looked at these town hall events, people were doing this. They would go out to these town halls. My husband is dying, and if you take away my Medicare, he's going to die, right? And you see Tom Cotton on stage, and what's he supposed to do? I say, good, your husband should, he's not going to say your husband should die, right? And so it turns into this kind of mushy thing. The best answer to that is, how can I help you personally? Can I bring your case to my church? Can I bring your case to my synagogue? Can we put a GoFundMe online? How can we get money to help you, right? How can we help you? And now let's talk about the policies that help the vast majority of people. Let's talk about the policies that don't confiscate wealth from people or restrict their health options. Let's talk about the policies that are based on individual freedom and not based on just what you need. I'm happy to help you out as an individual, but you can't make policy based on that.
Ben? Ben, at UCSB, you skewered income inequality, but you said it so fast, I didn't get it all.
Yeah, sorry.
So would you repeat it, please?
Not to be insulting to anybody who's above the age of 60, but one of the reasons a large part of my audience is under the age of 40 is because I speak at 76 RPM. What I said about income inequality is a few things. Number one, the idea that the people who are very, very rich somehow stole from the people who are very, very poor, and that's why they're very, very rich is stupid. Poor people are poor and don't have lots of money to steal. Okay, so the idea that Bill Gates got rich by ripping off a bunch of homeless people. Homeless people were not buying Microsoft, nor was he going to them, forcing Microsoft on them for them to stick into their boxes. Right? Like, that's not how he got rich. The way you get rich in any free-functioning economy is by participating in an enormous number of voluntary transactions that benefit both sides. You should care about the question of poverty. You shouldn't care about the question of income inequality. You should care about how do we make poor people rich, not how do we make rich people poorer so that everybody's at the same level. Because that's just you being jealous. That's just you not liking the guy's house next door because it's bigger than your house. And look at that, he has a big house, I have a smaller house. Maybe I'll just go rob his place. right? That's not moral, and it's not decent, and it's also not true. The fact is that while the left decries income inequality, the evils of capitalism, since 1994, the world extreme poverty rate has been sliced in half by increased capitalism and by free markets. Right? I mean, the free markets that are now being bashed left and right, those free markets are the greatest innovation in the history of humanity when it comes to the economy. It's why you have nice stuff. It's why you're not sitting in your backyard right now crafting your own handmade tie from a sheep that you had to shear yourself. I mean, I thought there's a great thing. I mean, just there's a little bit of a caveat on trade. I thought my favorite story of the last few months, there was some guy who decided that he wanted to make himself a BLT and see how much it cost to make the whole thing himself, right? Like from scratch. So he actually went and he bought a cow, and then he like killed the cow, and he went out and he got a pig, and he went out and he milked and he made the cheese. He went out and he grew some wheat, and then he milled it. Right, this whole thing, it cost him $1,600 to make a BLT, and it took him 6 months. Right, you can go down to your local restaurant and get a BLT for $5 because of global trade and because freedom of income. And the fact is that when people talk about income inequality, what they're really saying is they don't understand how money works. They think that if there's two people in a room, one person with $5, one person with $1, the person with 5 stole from the person with 1. It doesn't ask the question, how did the person get poor? The reality is, if you don't want to be permanently poor in America, it's very, very easy. The Brookings Institute, which is a left-leaning institute, they say you only have to do 3 things. Graduate high school, don't have babies out of wedlock, get a job. That's it. Those are the 3 things. 75% of the people who do those 3 things will end up in the middle class. Not just not poor, in the middle class. Only 2% of people who do those 3 things end up permanently poor in the United States. So the idea that it's the rich people keeping the poor people down, and they're doing it for their own pleasure, their own sick pleasure. Bill Gates has, for sport, he shoots poor people from the balcony of his mansion. It's asinine in every conceivable way. And it's so funny. I did a debate on National Geographic that never aired. It never aired because it was brutal. And it was me against 3, which made it almost fair for them. And it was like Van Jones, and I think Van Jones was on the other side, and some professor from NYU. And it was exactly on this topic. And I said to them, are you proposing that we actually just kill the rich people and redistribute their money? And they said no. And I said to them, why are you talking about the rich people? What did they do? And they didn't have an answer because they don't know what the rich people did. They just know they want their cash. The idea that income inequality is correlated in any way with overall poverty is really silly. There are countries with really high income inequality and very low overall poverty. That's like the United States. There are countries with 0 income inequality, Sudan, and nobody has anything. Right? So the idea that the differential is the statistic that matters, it doesn't. The fact is, in the United States, 9 out of 10 Americans are living above the global middle income standard. Right? Everybody in the United States is rich by global standards. And you want to get rid of the income inequality by destroying that, good luck to you.
We have one final question back here.
Hello, Mr. Shapiro. My name is Andrea, and I am a Cal State LA student.
Yeah, good luck to you.
I'm actually originally a Northern Californian. And so I'm from an area that's actually a bit more conservative than out here. And so making the transition to living in Los Angeles, a very liberal city that has a perception of conservatives as being rather racist and...
You look like a racist to me.
Do I? I know, I'm the only one here. Oh, my gosh. So I guess my question is, where does this perception come from in a lot of like urban communities or more diverse communities that people who hold conservative values are racist?
I mean, I think that the perception comes from a consistent drumbeat since the 1960s that anybody who opposes bigger government is racist. Here's a government program, and we're designing it for inner city people of minority ethnicity specifically. I mean, this is sort of how LBJ used to talk, actually. And anybody who opposes that obviously opposes the aspirations of minority people. Or we're in favor of affirmative action that helps black people. Look at these crazy conservatives. They're not in favor of affirmative action. The only reason not to be in favor of affirmative action is because you're a racist. So it's very easy to call people against a group by suggesting that they oppose a policy that benefits a particular group. And that's, I think, what the left has done. They've said, here's a particular policy, it benefits this specific group, and now if you oppose that policy, it's because you hate that group. Well, what if I just oppose, in general, group-specific policies, right? Which is what conservatism is. Conservatism says, you don't get special treatment if you're white, you don't get special treatment if you're black, you don't get special treatment if you're anything because you're an individual human being and your race shouldn't matter. And the left says, that's racist. And you say, well, wait, why is individualism racist? And the answer is because they don't see people in terms of individuals. So there's this great disconnect. You say individual, And somebody on the left looks at you, and the first thing they think is black person. They don't think a person with a mind. They don't think a person with their own political viewpoint. They look at me, and the first thing they say is Jew, right? Really, because which is why, I mean, when I did a book called Primetime Propaganda about the TV industry, and I was able to get all of these leftists on record about how they keep right-wingers out. Why did I lie? I didn't lie to them. I told them my name was Ben Shapiro. I went to Harvard Law School, and they immediately assumed Jew in LA, got to be left. Right, because they judge me on the basis of group identity. The left breaks people down into group identities, and so it is anathema to them that you could be an individual with your own perspective on the universe, and you ought to be treated as an individual. And it's very easy to get people sucked into that, because the truth is that all human beings are to a certain extent tribal. Everybody is tribal. The less tribal we are, the better we are as human beings. I think that that's sort of the goal of religion generally. I mean, unfortunately, religious tribalism happens too, but I think that the goal of Judeo-Christian religion has been the universality of values, the goal of Western civilization, certainly the goal of America. The goal of America is that we are a nation based on a creed. There's been a lot of talk lately about nationalism. What does nationalism mean? Nationalism and patriotism, to me, mean what makes America great is the creed upon which we're based, not the color of the skin of the people here or the place they were born. That creed is what makes us a better country. It's what makes us worthy of God's favor. The left opposes that creed. The left doesn't believe that we're all individuals and that we all ought to be treated as individuals. And if you treat people as individuals, it's a blank spot for them. It's why if you say to people you're a conservative, they will actually say things like, well, then you're not legitimately black. Right? They will. They do it to Clarence Thomas. They say, well, you're a bad black person. Really? Did the skin color come with the Democratic Party card? But that's the way they think, because group identity is what trumps all else. And if that's the case, then we're finished as a country. Because the only group identity that ought to matter is your membership in the group of people who are decent and good, who work hard for their families, and make the country a better place. Thanks so much.